My boss stared at the luxury car in my parking spot, his face drained of color, and asked me a question that made my blood run cold. I wasn't supposed to have that car. I hadn't earned it. But there it sat, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, with my name on the keys and a note that said as promised. When I told him I thought the company assigned it to me, he shook his head slowly and whispered words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. What happened next exposed a truth so disturbing. It forced me to abandon everything and run. I was 10 years old when I learned that some secrets are too heavy for a child to carry. But life doesn't ask permission before it drops them on your shoulders. My name is Rebecca Hollings, though everyone has always called me Becca, and I'm 49 years old now. Looking back at that little girl sitting by the cracked window on Ashwood Street in Cleveland, Ohio, I sometimes wonder if she knew what was coming. If somewhere deep inside, she felt the weight of destiny pressing against the glass. Our house was small, painfully small. 2 bedrooms that barely fit our second-hand furniture. Walls so thin I could hear my mother crying in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep. We lived on the wrong side of an invisible line. The kind of boundary that didn't need signs or fences because everyone just knew. Across the street stood the mansions. Not just houses, mansions with manicured lawns that seemed to glow green even in winter. With gates that whispered wealth, with driveways that curved like promises of a better life. Before we dive into this story, if you love true life stories that will leave you speechless, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Drop a comment below if you've ever discovered something about your past that changed everything. And smash that like button because this story is about to get intense. My mother, Patricia, worked herself to the bone. 2 jobs, sometimes 3 during the holidays. I'd watch her leave before dawn, her shoulders already sagging under the weight of bills and broken dreams, and return after dark with exhaustion carved into every line of her face. But she never complained, not once. Instead, she'd kiss my forehead, tuck me into bed, and whisper the same words she'd been saying since I could remember. Becca, someday you'll have things people won't believe you earned. I didn't understand what she meant back then. I thought she was talking about toys or maybe a bigger house. I had no idea she was talking about survival. I spent hours at that window. It became my television, my escape, my glimpse into a world that felt as distant as the moon. I'd press my face against the cool glass and watch those sleek black sedans glide into circular driveways like they were floating on air. Mercedes, BMWs, Cadillacs, cars that didn't rattle or sputter or need a prayer just to start. And the people who stepped out of them, God, they looked like they belonged in magazines. The men wore suits that fit so perfectly they seemed painted on. The women carried handbags that probably cost more than our monthly rent. They moved differently than us. With this easy confidence that comes from never having to check a price tag, I wanted that. I wanted it so badly it hurt, but I also feared it. Because Mom would catch me staring sometimes, and her expression would shift into something I couldn't name. Something between longing and terror. Then came the night that split my childhood in 2. I was still 10, maybe 3 weeks before my 11th birthday. It was late October, and the air had that sharp bite that makes you feel alive and exposed at the same time. I was at my usual spot by the window, knees pulled to my chest, watching the golden lights across the street flicker on one by one. And then I saw it. A car, different from the others. A midnight blue Lexus, so polished it looked liquid under the streetlights. It moved slowly down our street, deliberately, like it was searching for something. And then it stopped, right in front of our house. My heart started pounding. Cars like that didn't stop on our street. They didn't even slow down. This was the kind of neighborhood they drove through quickly with their doors locked. But this one stopped and the engine hummed softly and I couldn't look away. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than our car. And he had this presence about him, like the air rearranged itself to accommodate him. He stood there for a moment, adjusting his cuffs. And then he did something that made my blood turn cold. He looked directly at my window. Not at our house. At my window. At me, his eyes locked onto mine, and even through the darkness and the distance, I felt seen in a way that terrified me. And then he nodded. Not a friendly nod. Not a mistake. A nod of recognition, like he knew exactly who I was and had been looking for me. I heard my mother gasp behind me. I hadn't even realized she'd come into the room. When I turned, her face had gone completely white, like someone had drained every drop of blood from her body. Her hand was pressed against her chest, and she was staring at that man with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, absolute fear. Get away from the window, she whispered. But her voice was shaking so hard I almost didn't understand the words. Not him. Never him, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, watching as the man stood there beneath the streetlight. And then his lips moved. He mouthed something at me, slowly, deliberately, making sure I could read every syllable. One word. Soon. By the time I reached high school, I had convinced myself that the man in the midnight blue Lexus had been a hallucination. A trick of childhood imagination mixed with streetlight shadows. My mother never spoke about that night again, and I learned not to ask. But something had shifted in our house after that evening. Mom became vigilant in a way that went beyond normal parental protection. She checked the locks 3 times before bed. She never opened the door without looking through the peephole first. And she watched me, constantly, like she was waiting for something terrible to happen. We were different from other families, and by then I knew it. While my classmates complained about their parents being too strict or too lenient, I watched my mother work herself to exhaustion, taking double shifts at the hospital and weekend hours at the grocery store. She was terrified of something, though she'd never say what. Late-night knocks would send her into a panic. The sound of expensive cars on our street made her go rigid. She was always checking the curtains, peering out into the darkness like she expected to see something or someone watching back. I was 16 when she caught me at the window again. I hadn't even realized I was doing it, standing there in the dusk, watching a silver Mercedes pull into the driveway across the street. I was imagining what it would feel like to live like that, to move through the world with that kind of ease and certainty. Then I felt her hand clamp around my wrist, hard enough to bruise. "Do not chase what doesn't belong to you," she hissed, and there was something wild in her eyes. Something desperate. "Do you understand me, Rebecca? Some things are not meant for us," but her words had the opposite effect. They planted a question in my mind that grew roots and wouldn't let go. Why didn't it belong to us? What was she so afraid of? And why did it feel like she wasn't warning me away from wealth or ambition, but from something specific, something she knew? The questions ate at me for weeks. And then, on a gray Saturday afternoon when Mom was working a double shift, I made a decision that would change everything. I went into her closet. It was cramped and musty, filled with clothes she'd worn for years and shoes with worn-down heels. But in the back, hidden behind a broken suitcase and old winter coats, I found a leather briefcase. It was expensive, real leather, the kind that softens with age. And embossed in the corner were initials in gold, RH, not Patricia Hollings. Not her initials, but mine. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside, I found things that made no sense. A silver key fob with a logo I recognized from luxury car commercials. A manila folder stuffed with documents. And beneath it all, a stack of letters, each one on thick, expensive paper with a corporate letterhead I'd seen before in business magazines. My school library kept. Ariston Dynamics, one of the biggest corporations in the country. The kind of place that made headlines when they launched new technology or acquired smaller companies. I pulled out the first letter and my vision blurred as I read the date. 27 years ago. 2 years before I was born, the letter began, regarding Project Aurora, Rebecca Hollings. Phase 1 implementation. I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of the words. Financial provisions. Educational oversight. Monitoring protocols. Contingency plans. It read like a contract. Like someone had been planning something involving a person named Rebecca Hollings. Before that person even existed, before I even existed, I tore through the other letters, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. They were all similar, spanning years, discussing phases and timelines and conditions. Some were addressed to my mother. Others mentioned her as a participant, a guardian, a component of something larger. And every single one was stamped with that same logo, Ariston Dynamics. Then, at the bottom of the pile, I found an envelope that hadn't been opened. It was addressed to Patricia Hollings, dated just 3 months earlier, recent, current. The return address made my stomach drop. The sender was listed as J. Hale, Executive Office. But paper-clipped to the envelope was a small business card. And on it was a handwritten note in sharp, precise handwriting. "The girl is nearly ready. We should discuss next steps." And beneath the note was a signature I didn't recognize, but somehow knew I should. Because attached to the card with a paper clip was a tiny photograph, faded and creased. A photograph of the man from the midnight blue Lexus, standing in front of Ariston Dynamics headquarters, smiling like he owned the world. I'm 49 years old now, and I can tell you that some moments divide your life into before and after. Finding those letters was one of them. But what came next? What happened over the decades that followed? That's when I learned the real truth. That my entire life had been designed by people I'd never met, for reasons I couldn't have imagined. I'm divorced now. My ex-husband, Tom, couldn't handle the way my life seemed to attract strangeness. The way coincidences piled up around me like they were waiting for something. We split when Colin was 5. My son is 14 now, smart and curious. And sometimes I catch him looking at me with questions in his eyes that I'm not ready to answer. For the last decade, I've worked at Fluorescent Dynamics, the same company from those letters, the same corporation that had been writing about me before I was born. And here's the thing that still makes my skin crawl: I didn't apply there. I didn't send a resume or go through an interview process. They found me. It was 10 years ago, 3 months after my divorce was finalized. I was working at a small marketing firm, barely making enough to cover rent and Colin's daycare. Then I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman with a smooth, professional voice told me that Fluorescent Dynamics was interested in bringing me on board. She said they'd been following my work, that I was exactly what they needed, that the position was mine if I wanted it. The salary she quoted was 3 times what I was making. I said yes before I even asked what the job was. My first day, I walked into that gleaming glass tower downtown, and the receptionist, Dana, looked up at me and froze. Her smile faltered and she tilted her head like she was trying to place me. "You look familiar," she said slowly. I laughed it off, told her I just had one of those faces. But her eyes lingered on me as I walked to the elevator, and I felt something cold slide down my spine. Over the years, strange things kept happening. Small things at first, easy to dismiss. The executive VP, Richard Crane, a man I'd never formally met, would pass me in the hallway and say, "Morning, kiddo," with this familiarity that made no sense. The HR manager, Lily Fang, would see me and smile and say things like, "Good to have you back," even though I'd never left. Security guard Marcus Till would wave me through checkpoints without scanning my badge, like I didn't need clearance. And the old janitor, Ms. Harrow, would whisper cryptic things when she passed me in empty hallways. "It's almost time," she'd say, her eyes bright and knowing. Almost time. I told myself I was imagining patterns where there were none, that I was being paranoid. But then came the day everything shattered. It was a Tuesday morning, unremarkable in every way. I'd dropped Colin at school, grabbed coffee, and headed to the office. I parked in the employee garage like I did every day, took the elevator down to the lower level where mid-level employees like me were assigned spots. But when I stepped out, I froze. Sitting in my parking space was a brand new car. Not just any car. A glossy black luxury sedan, the kind the top executives drove, with the Fluorescent Dynamics logo subtly embossed on the side. The kind of car that cost more than I made in 2 years. I walked toward it slowly, convinced there'd been a mistake. But taped to the driver's side window was an envelope with my name on it. Inside were keys and a small card, printed on that same expensive paper I'd seen in my mother's closet all those years ago. For Ms. Hollings, as promised, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stood there in that parking garage, holding keys to a car I hadn't earned, staring at a message that suggested someone had been making promises about me. When I finally made it upstairs, I went straight to my boss's office. Jonathan Hale, the CEO himself. The man whose name had been on those letters. I knocked, and his assistant waved me in without asking why I was there. Jonathan was standing by the window when I entered, looking out over the city. He didn't turn around. "Mr. Hale," I said, and my voice sounded strange. "Hi. There's a car downstairs, in my spot, with my name on it." He was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he turned to face me, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. "Becca," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Something like regret. "We need to talk." Jonathan Hale's office was on the 42nd floor, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city below look like a toy model. I'd been in this office exactly 3 times in 10 years, always for performance reviews, always feeling like I didn't belong among the leather furniture and abstract art. That probably cost more than my house. But that morning, I walked in without knocking, without an appointment, with those car keys clutched so tight in my hand they left marks in my palm. Jonathan was standing at the far wall, studying a collection of framed photographs, company milestones, award ceremonies, executive portraits. I'd never paid much attention to them before, but as I got closer, my breath caught in my throat. One of the photos wasn't like the others. It showed a younger Jonathan, maybe in his early 30s, standing outside what looked like a research facility. And beside him, smiling in a way I'd never seen her smile, wearing a dress I'd never seen her wear, was my mother. She looked so young, so hopeful, so completely different from the exhausted, frightened woman I'd grown up with. "That's her," I said, and my voice came out hoarse. "That's my mother." Jonathan didn't turn around. "I know. Why is her picture on your wall? Why do you have a photograph of my mother from before I was born?" He finally looked at me, and the expression on his face made my stomach drop. He looked tired. No, not tired, haunted. Like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long and had just realized he couldn't put it down. "Sit down, Rebecca." "I don't want to sit down. I want answers." I held up the keys. There's a car downstairs. A company car. With my name on it. A card that says, as promised, I'm not an executive. I'm not even senior management. So explain to me what the hell is going on." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He walked to his desk, pressed a button on his phone. "Caleb, I need you in here, now." We stood in silence while we waited. The tension in the room was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and panicked, and I realized my hands were shaking. Then the door opened and Caleb Rourke walked in. Security director, ex-military. The kind of man who looked like he could break you in half without breaking a sweat. But right now, he looked pale, nervous. "Caleb," Jonathan said quietly. "Tell Ms. Hollings about the vehicle." Caleb glanced at me, then back at Jonathan. "Sir, I already ran a full check. The vehicle isn't on our registry. The VIN doesn't match any of our fleet records. According to our system, it doesn't exist." The room tilted. "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" "It's sitting in the parking garage right now." "I know," Caleb said. And he sounded genuinely disturbed. "But there's no purchase order. No lease agreement. No insurance policy. It's not in our books. And the key fob." He hesitated. "The key fob has a security code that was decommissioned 23 years ago." My mouth went dry. "Decommissioned? From a program that was shut down," Jonathan said softly. "A program that officially never existed." I looked between them, feeling like the floor was crumbling beneath my feet. "What program?" Jonathan's eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen in him before. "Fear, Rebecca," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell me the truth. Who told you about Project Aurora?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Project Aurora. The same words I'd seen on those letters in my mother's closet when I was 16. The same words that had been stamped on documents dated before I was born. No one told me. I managed to say. I found letters. When I was a teenager. In my mother's things." Jonathan closed his eyes. "Jesus Christ, what is Project Aurora?" I demanded, and my voice was rising now, edging toward hysteria. "What does it have to do with me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Caleb. "Leave us." And Caleb, "Not a word to anyone. Do you understand?" "Not anyone." Caleb nodded and left quickly, like he was grateful for the excuse to escape. The door clicked shut and Jonathan and I were alone. "Sit down," he said again, gentler this time. This time I sat. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. Jonathan came around his desk and leaned against it, arms crossed, looking down at me like he was trying to figure out how to explain something impossible. "Your mother," he began slowly, "worked for Riston Dynamics 31 years ago. She was a research assistant in our biotechnology division. Brilliant woman. One of the best we had." I wanted to interrupt, to tell him my mother had worked at a hospital and a grocery store my entire life, that she'd never mentioned any research position, any corporation. But something in his tone made me stay quiet. "She was part of a project," he continued. "An experimental program, classified, off the books. The kind of thing the company would deny ever existed if anyone asked." My heart was hammering. "What kind of project?" He met my eyes. "Genetic optimization. Designer children. The creation of human subjects with enhanced cognitive abilities, perfect health markers, extended lifespans. We called it Project Aurora." The room spun. I gripped the armrests of my chair, trying to anchor myself to something solid. "We only had one successful candidate," Jonathan said quietly. "One child who survived the full protocol. One birth that made it to term without complications." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at him as the truth crashed over me like a wave. "You," he whispered. "You were Project Aurora, Rebecca." I don't remember driving to my mother's house. I must have gotten in the car, must have navigated traffic, must have made turns and stopped at lights, but I have no memory of any of it. All I remember is suddenly being there, parked in her driveway, staring at the small house where I'd grown up, where I'd spent so many nights watching from the window, dreaming of a different life. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, just sitting there, hands folded, staring at nothing. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked resigned, like she'd been waiting for this moment for decades. I slammed the car keys down on the counter so hard they skittered across the surface. "Mom, why is there a company car with my name on it? Why did the CEO know you? What is Project Aurora?" She didn't speak. She just stood slowly, walked to a drawer and pulled out an envelope. That envelope. The one I'd found years ago, the one that had never been opened. She handed it to me with trembling hands. "You should have this," she whispered. "You should have always had this." I tore it open. Inside was a document, official looking, with seals and signatures and legal language that made my head swim. But at the top, in bold letters, was a title that made my blood run cold. Project Aurora subject documentation beneath it, a birth certificate. But not a normal one. This one had fields I'd never seen before. Genetic markers, enhancement protocols, monitoring requirements. And at the bottom, under status, one word, asset. My vision blurred. Mom, what is this? She sank back into her chair, and when she looked up at me, tears were streaming down her face. Your father, she said, and her voice broke on the word. The man you thought was your father. He wasn't your biological father, Becca. He was an Ariston researcher. He was assigned to me. They paid him to be in your life, to monitor you, to report back. I couldn't process what she was saying. It was too big, too impossible. You weren't a normal birth, she continued. And every word seemed to hurt her. You were created, designed. They used my eggs, but they altered them, enhanced them. You were supposed to be the first of a new generation. Perfect health, superior intelligence, extended lifespan. You were their prototype. The walls were closing in. I couldn't breathe. Why didn't you tell me? Because they promised it was over. She stood up, grabbing my arms. They promised me that when the program was shut down, when the scandal broke and the lawsuit started, they'd leave you alone. That you'd get to live a normal life. That's all I wanted for you. A normal life. I pulled away from her. Then why am I working there? Why did they recruit me? Why is there a car with my name on it? Her face went white. What car? A company car. A luxury sedan. It just appeared in my parking spot. With a note that said as promised. The color drained completely from her face. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. No, she whispered. No, no, no. They said it was over. They said you were free. Free from what? She looked at me with eyes full of terror, and in that moment, I saw the same expression she'd had that night when I was 10. When the man in the midnight blue Lexus had stopped in front of our house. If they gave you a car, she said, her voice shaking, that means they want you back. The next morning, I walked back into Ariston Dynamics like I was walking into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Everything looked the same. The gleaming lobby with its marble floors, the security checkpoint with its blinking scanners, the elevator that carried me up to the 23rd floor, where my cubicle sat among dozens of others. But nothing felt the same. It was like someone had taken the world I knew and tilted it just slightly off its axis. And now everything that had seemed normal before suddenly felt staged. Deliberate, wrong. Marcus was at his usual post by the security desk. I'd seen him every single workday for 10 years. He'd always waved me through with a smile, called me by name, asked about Colin, but that morning, when I walked past him, he stared straight ahead like I was invisible. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. And when I said good morning, he didn't respond. Didn't even blink. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe he was having a bad day. But then I got to my floor and saw Lily Fang coming out of the break room. She'd always been friendly, almost aggressively so. Always stopping to chat about weekend plans or new recipes she'd tried. But when she saw me, her face went blank. She turned and walked in the opposite direction, her heels clicking rapidly against the tile like she was fleeing. By lunchtime, I realized that everyone was avoiding me. Richard Crane, the executive VP who'd always called me kiddo with that strange familiarity, saw me in the hallway and immediately ducked into a conference room. Dana at the front desk suddenly became very interested in her computer screen when I passed. People I'd worked with for years wouldn't meet my eyes. But it was Ms. Harrow who finally confirmed that I wasn't imagining things. I was leaving the restroom when I nearly collided with her in the empty hallway. She was pushing her cleaning cart, moving slowly like she always did, but when she saw me, she stopped. Her weathered face split into a knowing smile that made my skin crawl. She leaned close, and I could smell industrial cleaner and something else, something medicinal. It begins tonight, she whispered, her eyes bright with something that looked almost like excitement. What begins tonight? I asked, but she was already moving away, humming softly to herself, leaving me standing there with my heart racing. At 7 p.m., as the building emptied and the fluorescent lights started clicking off section by section, I found myself alone in the parking garage. Or I thought I was alone. Then I heard footsteps echoing off the concrete, and Jonathan Hale emerged from the shadows near the elevator bank. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore, just his shirt and tie, and he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. You came back, he said, and there was something like relief in his voice. I work here, I replied, trying to sound normal, trying to pretend my hands weren't shaking. Why wouldn't I come back? He walked toward the luxury car, the one that shouldn't exist, the one with my name on it. In the harsh garage lighting, it looked even more surreal. Too perfect, too pristine. Like it had been designed by someone who'd never actually driven a car but had studied pictures of. Then that car, Jonathan said slowly. Reacts to one person. You, only you. I laughed, but it came out high and nervous. What do you mean reacts? It's a car. Cars don't react to people. He pulled something from his pocket. A small device, sleek and black, covered in buttons I didn't recognize. Without explaining, he pressed one of them. The car came alive. That's the only way I can describe it. It didn't just turn on the way normal cars do, it woke up. The dashboard lit up in a cascade of blue light. The engine hummed to life with a sound that was too smooth, too quiet. And then something happened that made my breath catch in my throat. A holographic screen flickered into existence on the windshield, hovering in the air like something out of a science fiction movie, and on that screen, in crisp, glowing letters, were words that made my blood turn to ice. Subject returning, Rebecca Hollings. I stumbled backward. What the hell is that? Jonathan's face was grim. Your mother tried to protect you from what your real father created. She thought if she kept you away from this world, if she raised you in poverty and obscurity, that you'd never be activated. That the program would forget about you. Activated? The word tasted wrong in my mouth. I'm not a machine, no, he said quietly. You're something much more valuable. Project Aurora wasn't just about genetics, Rebecca. It was about creating the perfect corporate successor. Someone with enhanced intelligence, perfect memory, and he paused. Like the next word hurt him to say, designed obedience. You were engineered to be a leader who could be controlled. The ultimate asset. I shook my head, backing away from him, from the car, from all of it. You're insane. This is insane. I'm just a person. A normal person, are you? He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was old, faded at the edges, but the image was clear enough. A laboratory, sterile and white, filled with equipment I didn't recognize. And in the center, a glass chamber, and inside that chamber, a newborn baby. Tubes and wires connected to tiny limbs. Monitors displaying data I couldn't read. The baby's wristband was visible. Printed in neat black letters, Subject Aurora 1, Rebecca Hollings. My mother wasn't in the picture. No one was holding the baby. It was alone in that glass chamber, surrounded by machines. That's not me, I whispered. But my voice had no conviction. It is, Jonathan said. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I'm so sorry. But it is. Before I could respond, before I could process what I was seeing, the garage lights cut out. All of them simultaneously, plunging us into complete darkness. For a moment, there was only the sound of my ragged breathing and the quiet hum of the car's engine. Then emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a sickly red glow, and in that red light, I saw them. 5 figures, stepping out from behind pillars and parked cars, moving toward me in a loose circle. Caleb Rourke, the security director. Lily Fang from HR, Richard Crane, the executive VP, Ms. Harrow, still pushing her cleaning cart. And Jonathan, standing closest to me, his face unreadable. They all stared at me like I was something precious they'd lost and finally found again. Like I was a puzzle piece that had been missing from a picture they'd been trying to complete for decades. What is this? I asked, and my voice came out small and terrified. Jonathan stepped forward, his hands raised like he was approaching a frightened animal. Project Aurora wasn't just genetics, Rebecca. It was psychological conditioning, embedded memories, programmed responses. You were designed not just to be intelligent, but to be compliant. To step into leadership when the time was right. What do you want from me? The words barely made it past my lips. He smiled, but it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. Rebecca, you were built to replace me. To take over Riston Dynamics. You're the culmination of 30 years of research and development. You're not just an employee. You're the heir apparent. The perfect CEO. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might tear through my chest. I don't want this. I never wanted any of this. Ms. Harrow shook her head slowly, and when she spoke, her voice had lost all traces of the friendly janitor I'd known. It was cold, clinical. It doesn't matter what you want, dear. The system is waking up. It's been dormant for decades, waiting for the right triggers, the right circumstances. But now that you've touched the car, now that you've seen the documentation, now that you know what you are, the protocol has been initiated. The car beeped once, twice. Then a voice emerged from its speakers, artificial and emotionless. And it said words that made my skin crawl, initiating reclamation protocol. Subject Rebecca Hollings. Prepare for integration. The doors unlocked with a soft click. The interior lights pulsed in a rhythm that felt almost biological, like a heartbeat. My name flashed across the windshield again and again. And I realized with growing horror that the car wasn't just a car. It was a component, a tool. Part of something larger that had been waiting for me to return. They all stepped back. Even Jonathan. Even Caleb with his military training and intimidating presence. They moved away from the car like it belonged to someone far more powerful than any of them. Someone who wasn't in this garage but whose presence could be felt nonetheless. I ran. I didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just turned and ran toward the exit ramp. My footsteps echoing off concrete walls. Behind me, I heard them calling. Jonathan's voice, strained and desperate. Rebecca, wait, please, you don't understand. Lily's voice, almost pleading, it's not safe out there alone. Ms. Harrow's voice, eerily calm, you can't run from what you are, child, but I kept running. I ran out of that garage, into the street, flagged down a taxi with shaking hands. I went straight to my house, threw clothes into suitcases, grabbed Colin from school with some story about a family emergency. We drove for hours, crossing state lines, not stopping until we reached a small town in New Mexico where nobody knew me, where I could disappear. I never returned to Ariston Dynamics. I changed my name, changed Colin's name, found work under the table at a diner where they didn't ask questions. I told Colin his father's family was dangerous, that we had to start over, that we'd be safe now. He was old enough to be scared but young enough not to ask too many questions. For 3 years, we lived quietly. I convinced myself we'd escaped, that whatever they'd planned for me, whatever I was supposed to become, I'd outrun it. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear something that made my blood freeze. A car engine, smooth and quiet, idling somewhere on our street. I'd go to the window, peer through the curtains and see nothing. Just empty pavement and streetlights. But the sound would linger just at the edge of hearing, like a memory that wouldn't fade. And sometimes in dreams, I'd hear a voice. The same voice from my childhood. From that night when I was 10 and the midnight blue Lexus stopped in front of my house. A man's voice, cultured and patient, saying the same word over and over. Soon, last week, everything changed again. I was coming home from my shift at the diner, exhausted and thinking about what to make Colin for dinner, when I saw it. A black sedan, parked directly in front of our small rental house. No license plates. No dealership tags. No visible driver inside. My first instinct was to run, to grab Colin and disappear again. But something made me stop. Something made me walk closer, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around. On the hood of the car sat a key fob. Sleek, black, exactly like the one I'd seen 3 years ago. And attached to it with a small piece of string was a note, written in the same sharp, precise handwriting I'd seen on that business card in my mother's closet so many years before. I picked it up with trembling hands and read the words that confirmed my worst fear. The fear that had been growing inside me since the day I ran. It's time to come back, Rebecca. We're ready for you now.